Number 10. Green Lantern ringless. Most times when I say Green Lantern, I mean Hal. Poor tripping over its feet Hal. Currently Black Star Hal. Ignore that. The lantern rings function on will, drawn to people with the capacity for great will and ability to overcome fear, through the force of said will. Once selected, the bearer has access to the full scope of the ring's abilities, including but not limited to conjuring of objects, the limits of which are one's own imagination. They can encase themselves in a force field, travel the galaxy, learn to be able to affect things that are yellow colored. Even the time limit when you have to charge your ring isn't as intense as it used to be. All in all, it's a great tool, but what happens when you don't have it? Well, you're just a person. This has come up a few times in fights on the rare occasion that the ring's charge does run out, or when the ring has been passed to someone else, but someone is still coming for the first bearer. There's actually a great moment at the end of the New 52 where Hal passes his ring off to Bruce, who for years canonically has just been one of the people who has been accepted could wield it, except for that brief period in Johns' run after Rebirth, this being Hal's rebirth, him being brought back to life, not Rebirth in general. This was when Hal and Bruce were patching up their relationship, and Bruce was the jerk for some reason for remembering all those people that Hal killed. Well, he took the ring and couldn't handle it. Okay, sure Jan. Anyways, without his ring, Hal is a pretty average person. All human lanterns are, even if they are trained in martial arts or have a gun. Looking at you, Baz. They still are probably going to be useless, as if you brought the Green Lantern to a fight, it probably wasn't your average fight, and you may even be in space, in which case they're dead. Number 9. Spider-Woman while pregnant. We're talking about Jessica Drew here. Now, Jessica Drew initially had no interest in motherhood, so it made a compelling story and for some a perplexing arc when she decided that actually she did want to be a parent. There was also a whole who's the baby's daddy arc, because I guess the writer just saw one too many Maury episodes. Here's the thing, she still fought crime, sorta kinda, for a bit, and this stressed me out to no end. I have a baby, in no way am I saying that when pregnant you just need to go hide away in a corner somewhere, but there's a difference between going to work and going to the gym and fighting crime. Even the images of her in her costume pregnant stressed me out. And oh, did she fight, not always intentionally, and super pregnant too, huge. Just okay now, you know that the writers weren't really gonna let anything happen, but reality check, these were villains. One kick, one punch, one bad fall, one object falling on her and her baby is dead, and most of them don't have the morality to not do that. The comics didn't depict her as useless, she kicked an unrealistic amount of butt. I've been 9 months pregnant and I can hear the but she's Spider-Woman and has a super baby. No, look at this cover. Her baby has spider sense, also maybe she's in labor and Skrulls. You know, when you're fighting and pregnant, it's usually because you have no choice. She's best friends with Carol, no one could make it so that she had a smooth pregnancy. Oh, but she wanted to help, you say. One kick. One. Parenting starts before the baby is born, that's all I'm saying. I'm pressed, stressed, triggered. Number 8. Number 8, WILDCAT. He's on here now because he's gotten a little old. Okay, so WILDCAT is a member of the JSA, the Justice Society of America, and it's a hero from the Golden Age. So when DC initially dealt with the Golden and Silver Ages, it was by reconciling them by making those heroes older than their Silver Age counterparts. So WILDCAT became a mentor to many younger heroes, or heroes who stayed young, such as Batman and Superman. However, he was getting older, and essentially he's just a dude. A dude with 9 lives, but just a dude. So if he's up against someone with powers, increased tech, or even just someone significantly younger, he's not going to be much help. Yes, experience counts for a lot and can help you strategize, but when it comes to stamina and strength, sometimes you just age out. It's a compelling story if told well. Justice League Unlimited had a fun time with it.
Number 7. Fisherman. Any rendition of this supervillain is like a diabolical but less impressive Aquaman. As to be expected as well, he is an Aquaman villain. His Earth 1 rendition was just super into fishing, something Aquaman is not a huge fan of considering global issues of overfishing and given the fact that he is an ocean conservationist, which immediately put him at odds with the Fisherman in comics. So what can the Fisherman do to beat his nemesis Aquaman? Fish? And that's about it. Sure, he has a bunch of fancy lures, but so does my grandfather. And I don't think that's enough to allow him to take on Aquaman. I will say this, the New Earth version of him at least can breathe underwater and attempts to pull off criminal heists using the ocean and the creatures within it, but still, that seems to be his main power. And even then, he is still easily thwarted. Obviously, this villain has been deemed so useless that he hasn't even really cropped up in the New 52 or Rebirth.
Number 6, Billy Batson, not Shazam. Come on, reach with me. Feel the burn. So Billy Batson turns into Shazam, aka Captain Marvel, when he says the magic word, Shazam. However, other than that, he's just a kid. A regular kid. This is worse than being just an average person because, well, he's an untrained kid. So yeah, he has the stamina, but he's small, not as strong, and easy to capture. If you can keep Billy from transforming, you have a massive advantage. And there are so many ways to do it. One of the best Billy surprise transformations is in the Justice League Unlimited, when Captain Marvel, still called that, he hadn't lost that lawsuit yet, joins the Justice League, and Superman gets jealous of him. And the two end up fighting. It's actually quite brutal later in the episode, only for Billy to accidentally transform back mid-fight, and for Superman to realize he's been fighting and been jealous of like a 10-year-old. Awkward.
Fight's over, son.
Number 5. Professor Xavier. Come on, how could Professor X be useless in a fight, right? He's one of the strongest telepaths in the world. He can influence people's thoughts, change their minds, inception, Jedi mind tricks, the whole 9 yards. But what if he was fighting robots? If he was fighting an army of creatures without a mind but simply circuiting and programming, what could he do? He doesn't have influence over beings without consciousness. He doesn't have the telekinetic abilities of Jean Grey. Professor X would be screwed and possibly wind up dead all over again. Face it, robots versus Professor X equals his doom.
Number 4. Constantine and Avoidance. Now, Constantine may seem like an odd choice for those of you who well know how powerful he is and what he can do. Here's the thing, Constantine will avoid fighting as much as possible. If he can get out of having to fight, Constantine will. So he's not the best backup. You know, demons everywhere, blood everywhere. Constantine seeing if there's maybe some way he can summon Etrigan or get an item to do what needs to be done. Perhaps broker a sleazy deal of some kind. It makes him interesting, that's for sure, but when the chips are down and you need someone to come in and just smite everybody, well, Constantine will do it, but only if he absolutely has to. He's also gonna sass you the entire time, which contrary to what movies will try and convey is not cool or helpful while you're fighting. In fact, it's annoying.
Number 3. Kite Man. In his original incarnation, this supervillain was pretty useless. Even within his newer incarnation, he's pretty useless. Chuck Brown fights with just what you think he fights with, kites. And just as you'd expect, he is handily defeated every time he pops up in the comics. I feel like a big downfall of some of these gimmicky supervillains is that they get too attached to their gimmick. For some reason, writers keep bringing the DC villain back as well. He often tussles with Batman and was at least given a cooler hang glider to fly around in on, but still Batman manages to out hang glide him. In New 52, he was given a tragic backstory, wherein his son ended up murdered by the Riddler, who poisoned Charles Jr.'s kite string that he held onto. Heartbreaking. What's even more heartbreaking is they gave him this sad story and still no cool way to avenge it. How unfortunate.
Number 2. Storm in a small space. This is so high up because this has happened more than once. Demonstrable proof. We can put our arms down. Storm may be mistress of the elements, but she is also horribly claustrophobic. Small spaces or spaces where she feels trapped or enclosed, she's paralyzed with fear. And when this happens, all that power, well, it's not worth anything if you can't use it. That's the thing with all these hypothetical powers. If you can't access them, well, I might as well be there with Billy. Storm is aware this is a weakness and works hard to overcome it, as she does all her fears. Hey, we all have something. In at number 1, Hindsight Lad. Hindsight Lad might as well be called Postmortem Boy, cause well, that's what he does. He can look at a battle after it happened and analyze just where exactly things were deficient, how things went wrong, and what can be done about it next time. But he himself is soft, untrained, and not protected really. So if you threw him in a fight, well, he could tell you why he lost it after. But coming in as backup, not the most helpful. I mean, unless you're going up against one of those loses powers because of self-esteem villains, because then you can tell them how bad their last plans were and deal with the threat that way. Your last scheme was embarrassing, it wasn't even on brand, and green looks terrible on you. That's like a death sentence in the Marvel Universe because green is the villain color of choice.
Number 10. Maggot. You might be thinking, Amanda, stop picking on Maggot. Japheth has got it hard enough. And I feel you. Dude has to live with 2 maggots in his intestines that burrow in and out of his stomach, which is depicted as being pretty crazily painful. That's how he gains power and sustenance. But the crazy thing about his abilities is that they rely solely on his connection to his maggots. If you take maggots away, hold on. If you take Japheth's maggots away. It's a little clearer. He's useless. Sure, he has a little psychometric ability which allows him to see glimpses into the past or future of a location that he is in, but that is a very minute ability for him, and definitely not enough to carry him to victory or survival in a fight. It seems to me that this is a bit of a flaw, that your power source can leave you, leaving both you and your power source vulnerable. In other words, if you're in a fight with Japeth, just keep him from his maggots. Number 9. Almighty Dollar. This hero comes to us from the NFL Super Pro comic series, published by Marvel. Yeah, that's right. Even the NFL has a League of Superheroes. Everyone is doing it. The League of Heroes was called the Happy Campers, so named because they got their superpowers at a self-esteem camp, which was actually a front for a mad scientist who just wanted to dole out superpowers for some reason, I guess. The power that the Almighty Dollar received? Can you guess it? Yes, he is able to shoot change from his wrist. And if you've ever been hit by a pocket full of change, you might think, ow, that doesn't feel great, but you're like not going to die or anything from it. In other words, not gonna be great in a fight. Almighty Dollar up against any supervillain, and the supervillain would win hands down. Hands down. Take that, football. Number 8. Cypher. So in the comments for part 1 of this list, many of you expressed surprise that Cypher was not on the list. Shock, awe, why would we have left him out? Well, I know a bunch of you loyal Cypher fans may be watching, but I kind of agreed with the people in the last video's comments, and so I brought him forth for you to flaunt as useless. You're welcome. Useless in only really a fight, of course, that can't be avoided by resolving miscommunications. But if we're already in the midst of the fight and the reasons we're fighting for feel very clear, Cypher would not be much help there. His powers are based around understanding and communication with a variety of different languages, including alien and technological languages as well. But in a situation where we are just two people who don't see eye to eye, all the languages in the world cannot help you take a hit or dodge a fist. Unfortunately.
Number 7. Superman in a magical fight. Yes, I picked magic over kryptonite, because depending upon where you are in the timeline, you can walk to the store and buy some kryptonite. No, magic is a more complex, nebulous weakness for suits. Doubly so because sometimes it turns them into being a liability in a fight, meaning he can find himself being controlled and turned against the team he's fighting with. The Man of Steel may be able to dodge a speeding bullet, but he's incredibly susceptible to spells. He's had his powers taken away, swapped, been frozen, just many bad things for Clark. However, the good thing is he knows this is a weakness for him, so tries not to be involved in these conflicts, instead preferring to send leaguers, if it is a league issue that is. There are other people who are better suited to these threats. Also, he just tends to find magic a bit irritating. I would too. More powerful than a locomotive, taken down by a woman talking backwards.
Number 6. Captain Ultra. Sure, Captain Ultra has a ton of powers, especially for playing such a small role in the Marvel Universe, but he also has one very large weakness. His powers include flight, super strength, speed, stamina, and even super breath, as well as penetrating vision. If you're wondering what penetrating vision is, it's basically X-ray vision. That means that he can see through solid matter, and I really don't like the term penetrating vision. So for those of you who are terminology triggered, just imagine that when I say X-ray vision, I'm saying the other one. Anyways, even with all these abilities, Captain Ultra is still not infallible, and I'd even go so far as to categorize him as, yes, being useless in a fight. Why? Because he has an extreme phobia, an intense fear of fire to the point that he is shown fainting in the comics simply when someone lights a match, and he's super embarrassed about it. Given that some of the supervillain community already know about this, and some superheroes know about this, it would make him super easy to defeat in a fight. Little fire in his face and just watch him faint. Granted, he has worked through therapy to overcome his phobia, and has had some success, but even after all these years in the comics, his phobia is still sort of an issue. Number 5. Crazy Quilt. I have to applaud this DC villain for being a supervillain with a disability, something we don't see as often as not. Still, his being a diverse supervillain was not enough for him to be saved from being turned into a not so strong supervillain by DC writers. Paul Decker was blinded by a gunshot while being captured during a robbery. He was a former painter turned thief. While in prison, he volunteered for an experimental procedure to help him regain his vision. This worked, but only partially. Paul could now see, but he could only see crazy bright and blotchy colors, granting him limited and disoriented vision. Seeing the world this way eventually drove him insane, leading him to adopt the supervillain alias Crazy Quilts. He built a patchy, bright costume and a helmet that flashes blinding lights, among other things. His lack of sanity combined with his lack of powers and lack of true ingenuity when it comes to his gimmick make him an unfortunately easy villain to defeat. Not super useful. Number 4. Martian Manhunter. Martian Manhunter is one of the founding members of the Justice League, an alien who has the powers to shapeshift and manipulate minds. He is normally an opponent you wouldn't want to go up against. He was even able to cure Joker's insanity for a brief moment in the comics. But he has one insane weakness: his love for Oreos! Nah, I'm just kidding. His fear of fire. That's right, Manhunter has a next level fear of fire. Batman's contingency plan for him in the Tower of Babel storyline even preys on this fear. Bruce's plan if Martian Manhunter goes off the rails is to cover him in nanites, which make him feel the fire more intensely, as well as make him way more flammable. Granted, Martian Manhunter has worked hard to combat his deep-seated phobia, even more deep-seated than Captain Ultra, I would say. But still, the fact remains, if you set him on fire, he's gonna instantly start freaking out and become completely useless in a fight. Though granted, so would I. Don't set me on fire.
Number 3. MOGO, the living planet. This is a speed and mobility deal. If you land on MOGO, well then good luck. MOGO can manipulate its environment and make it quite an unpleasant time for you, trapped on a living planet that has literally turned against you. But MOGO is a planet, so the fight needs to be near it in order for it to be able to do some serious damage. Now MOGO can move, but being a planet is not exactly zipping across the galaxy, more like lumbering slowly. I wonder what that would be like if you were on MOGO. MOGO is an extremely powerful and integral member of the Green Lantern Corps, which it joined because it wanted to, and what greater display of will is there than that? So MOGO, useful, but you need to get it there first. And Kyle really needs to stay off MOGO. He always has such a terrible time. Kyle just has a hard time in general though, when people remember him that is. I remember Kyle, and not just because his girlfriend ended up in the fridge.
Number 2. Superman. I know, Superman was already on part 1 of this list, but we have more to talk about when it comes to Superman being, sometimes really useless. This time I want to remind you all about the Red Sun issue. And no, not the Superman comic where we explore an alternate world where Superman is raised in communist Russia, entitled Red Sun by Mark Miller, which you should read by the way. Check it out. We are talking about the sun in the sky. Superman's abilities actually become so powerful as a result of our sun. Fun fact. But it takes a specific kind of sun to power his abilities, a yellow one, while the red sun appears to drain or cancel out his super abilities. This hasn't been the most consistent depicted weakness of Superman in terms of how long it takes him to get weak, but the fact remains that if he's under a red sun's rays, he's gonna lose his powers. This has to do with the fact that he isn't receiving energy from the red sun to keep him powered up, meaning that he might have his powers for like a split second after, but as soon as his yellow sun solar energy stores are used up, he's just a normal guy. And normal guys are pretty easy for someone super to beat in a fight. Number 1. Tony Stark. Ooh, yeah, we're going there. Iron Man is obviously a super OP hero. He was the golden boy of the MCU up until recently, RIP Tony, and he was on the original Avengers in the comics. He's a brilliant guy with an insane number of tech gadgets and Iron Man suits to prove it. So, how could he be useless in a fight? Tony Stark was at one time an alcoholic, which, as we have seen when they delved into these issues with the character in the MCU, and in the comics in the story entitled Demon in a Bottle, which explores Stark's addiction and resolution to get help at the end, his alcoholism can be a huge problem for him. Demon in a Bottle involves a storyline where at one point, Tony Stark has some drinks, dons his Iron Man suit, and goes out to meet an ambassador who's like a serious fanboy, and then kills him. Yeah, that's what happens. Granted, this was not Iron Man's fault. He was being controlled by his nemesis, Justin Hammer, the CEO of a rival company. But if Hammer was able to get the best of him while he was drinking, who knows how easy he'd be to defeat in a fight. I mean, Rhodey definitely proved how useless he could be. The moral is basically here, don't drink and get into a super fight because you're just not going to be good at it. Number 10. Polka Dot Man. This villain comes to us from DC, another Batman villain gone wrong. And get ready for a lot more Batman villains, cause he's just the beginning of some of the most useless. I'm not sure who would win between Batman and Spider-Man for most useless villains, but both heroes have their own pretty steep pile of terrible ones. Polka Dot Man, whose real name is Abner Krill, is a villain who uses a polka dot suit to cause his mayhem. He has no superpowers of his own, so he relies heavily on this suit. The suit allows Abner to remove the polka dots, which can change size and transform into a variety of different weapons. Where the suit came from is unknown. Did he make it? Find it? I'd like to think the latter, because while you may be thinking this suit sounds pretty useful, and sure, maybe it does, Abner can't really seem to repair it when it breaks. Apparently the upkeep on it is so expensive that he sometimes just can't afford it. So I assume it is some kind of alien tech that is ultimately just worn by a regular Joe, which means that he's somewhat useful in a fight, but if his outfit breaks, he is rendered useless. Number 9. The Kangaroo. I love when supervillains are recognized even in the comics as being weak, and that is precisely what happens with Frank Oliver, famed jumper, ashamed boxer, and Spider-Man villain. Frank grew up obsessed by kangaroos cause, you know, he's Australian. It feels like Marvel writers were locked up in a room when they came up with this villain, and they wouldn't be allowed to leave until they had a new villain for Spider-Man. What if he's Australian? And what makes him Australian? I don't know, Jim, I'm starving, I just gotta get out of here. I don't know, kangaroos? That's it, that's brilliant, we've got it! Needless to say, Frank is a former boxer who was fired after he seriously injured a fellow boxer during a match. And his quote unquote power is that he can jump really well and you know, higher than normal. Marvel admitted just how weak he was when they decided to give him cybernetic enhancements. The unfortunate thing for Frank is these enhancements just make him like jump better. Like really? Even these improvements would not stop him from leaping to his doom in the comics. Though the mantle was later adopted by another villain and he was later resurrected. Number 8. Stilt Man. What's better than leaping somewhat high? Walking on stilts, of course. That's the premise behind this strange Marvel supervillain. Wilbur Day is a scientist who began his life of crime after stealing a coworker's design and using it to build a pair of armored stilt legs. Granted, his entire body is actually covered in metallic armor as well, and it is pretty strong. He even apparently managed to smash She-Hulk down through the street and into a subway tunnel one time during a fight. But being taller than other heroes doesn't mean you're automatically better than them, or that you're going to be helpful in a fight. For one thing, there's that whole knock the legs out from under him strategy, and 2, his armor apparently has weak spots which have been exposed in the comics before to easily take him down. Iron Man at one point even fought armor with armor by throwing one of Stiltman's legs right back in his face after he decided to detach them so he could jettison away, and as a result he knocked Stiltman out cold. Number 7. Bailey Hoskins. Coming to us from the comic series, and I'm not making this up, X-Men, worst X-Man ever. We have Bailey Hoskins. He has powers that are similar to Marvel villain Nitro, which is that he can self-detonate. The difference is Nitro can reform, where Bailey, well, he can't. Which means in any fight, all he has in him is one shot. In the worst X-Men series, he actually uses his ability in a political fight to turn the tides against corrupt mutants. But in any other fight, that ability means he'd just die. And as much as I want to say you don't have to survive a fight to be considered a victor, which I mean granted you don't, it's really hard to continue fighting if you're dead. So in any greater story arc where we have a fight that is spanning over a few comics, his power would be pretty useless. And if his explosion ended up missing his target, like for example if the person he's fighting has super speed or teleportation abilities, or I mean magic abilities obviously, but when are magic abilities not a problem in the comics, then he would lose the fight. useless. Number 6. Big Wheel. Ultimately a villain that could be very terrifying if he could actually steer the device that he uses to terrorize people with. The Big Wheel is a Spider-Man villain who often gets poked fun at, namely because his device is just so ridiculous. Big Wheel is actually Jackson Wheel, who unfortunately came up with the idea to have a device built by the Tinkerer based around his own name. And so he got a giant, uncontrollable wheel. Spider-Man dodges him easily in a fight, and Wheel usually meets his demise through being unable to brake and falling off the edge of things.
Number 5. Gladiator when sad. So Gladiator is one of those heroes whose powers and abilities are tied to their emotional state or self-confidence. This isn't the most uncommon thing, but it's not too hard to activate this in Gladiator. He doesn't have the thickest skin out there. Just ask Reed. If this happens in a fight, all of a sudden strength down, powers not landing or being ineffectual. That makes him feel worse. Now you're trapped in a shame spiral and probably dying because your backup is too busy feeling bad about how they're not saving you. Sometimes you're not in a position to give a pep talk. Sometimes you just need someone whose powers work no matter what. I'm looking at you, Captain Britain, too. Both of y'all. Self-esteem classes in your spare time.
Number 4. Sportsmaster. Another villain who seems to be masterful at getting away is Sportsmaster. Not so masterful at fighting though. Not even masterful really at playing sports. Lawrence Kroc is a DC villain who is known for tangling with Green Lantern. He used to be a professional athlete, and although he did have skills, he always took things too far and put winning above everything else. Becoming known for his cheating, he was eventually banned from all sports after severely injuring an opponent on the field. And once his sports career was over, he decided to turn to a life of crime. So interesting that people fail in their careers and immediately deflect to this. Crime ain't that easy, you know. Finding another job might be your best option, cause not everyone can pull this off. Case in point, old Sportsmaster here. Sportsmaster disguises himself and fights with, well, sports equipment. So you can imagine how successful his career must be. One of his signature go-tos in a fight is to escape by faking his death. Now, that's no way to win a fight. You'll survive though. So that's a plus, I guess. Number 3. Color Kid. First appearing in DC's Adventure Comics issue 342, Color Kid has some pretty useless powers. He can change the color of things. I mean, that is a power that can be used to, I don't know. It's neat, but not particularly useful. He could try to confuse someone, or maybe try to create some camouflage. Even then, it seems like it's better suited to helping avoid fights rather than actually fighting someone. What is it with characters with rainbow related powers? Rainbow Girl and Rainbow Kid are just both heroes that are not really useful. DC, just let's not do any more rainbow supers, okay? Let's leave them back in the 1960s where they were conceived, and try to forget that you were still trying to make Rainbow Girl a thing in 2008. Yeah. Number 2. White Rabbit. I'm talking about Jaina Hudson this time. Batman's nemesis from DC. Her powers are neat, but not really useful if you're looking to battle someone. Distract them? Maybe. But that's not really how you win a fight or are useful in a fight. She might be able to survive one though. Her powers give her slightly heightened speed, and she is pretty good at escaping. In fact, as soon as a hero shows up, that's her usual go-to move, to just run away. Which gives you an idea as to how powerful she is. She does have a unique ability which allows her to split herself into 2 people, separating her White Rabbit persona and her civilian persona, Jaina Hudson. However, these 2 personas are quite different, so it isn't even like she can really use her civilian self to help her take on the good guys. Number 1. Condiment King. The Condiment King originally debuted in the Batman animated series, and was created with the intention of being comic relief. So you can imagine, for this reason alone, he's probably not going to be very helpful in a fight. In fact, in the episode he first appeared in, when confronted and chased by Batman, he actually slips on his own ketchup and almost tumbles to his death. You know you're no match for a hero when you are defeated by your own villainous devices. He was later revealed to have been a former comedian who was brainwashed by the Joker, so it's good to know that he isn't an actual villain who takes himself seriously. Still, the brainwashing messed him up, and he has since continued to try and take on heroes, jumping from the animated series to comics like fellow but ultimately more successful villain Harley Quinn.